Hello, hello, and welcome. I am so excited to be here with you, and I'm very grateful for this opportunity and for this platform that connects you and I to each other and connects us to many opportunities around us. So today, this is a great day. This is Monday. Okay. I want you to just think about some good positive things that you can create in your life starting this week. And today, as you're joining in and tuning in, the conversation that we are going to have is very important. It is all about awareness and it's all about global cultural competency. And the guest that I have for you, a special guest, she's an amazing lady. She's the founder of NB Intercultural. And she's been helping companies to improve business communication across globe and across cultures. For over 15 years, she's been working closely with different organizations. And she's been helping their leaders to have cultural competency. This amazing lady has traveled over 40 countries and she speaks Spanish and Portuguese, and she has been in global mobility for over 15 years. I cannot wait but to welcome amazing Nicole Barrio. Hello,
Hi, thanks,
Nicole.
Anna. Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here and to start, like you said, the week off right on a Monday. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much for joining in. It is going to be so much fun. And I do believe we are live right now on
Great.
LinkedIn and we
Okay.
also live on YouTube and Facebook. So as you're
Perfect.
joining in, whatever platform you're joining in, I'm so excited to have you live. Say hello to us, tell us where you're from, and don't forget to ask your questions. We cannot wait to go in and equip you and energize you and give you some great tools how you can become the culturally competent leader today. So Nicole, as we dive into this, please share what is the reason you're so passionate about
Sure.
culture.
Yeah, thanks. Well, let's see. I mean, I could probably give you my whole life story, but I think it started like a lot of people, maybe from your upbringing. And so I was raised in the United States, but my mom had traveled every summer. She was a teacher. So every summer she was going somewhere to another country. So when she had my sister and I, we were growing up hearing these stories of her trips to Japan and to Greece and to France. And I just became fascinated with it. And then, fast forward to my experiences studying abroad in Argentina and living and working in Mexico. I just fell in love with other cultures, languages, travel, and really understanding people. So I think there's kind of two main reasons why I'm so passionate about it. One is that for me, with, if you're culturally competent or, if you can respect and understand other cultures, the world just opens up to you. So now you have all these people that you can communicate with successfully and build relationships with all over the world. So to me, that's just exciting, right? So I have friends all over the world now. And a lot of that is, sure, from travels and my career, but I think it's this openness and understanding that you have of other cultures. And then the other thing that I think drives me is I see this a lot of time at times in other people, and I've been guilty of it myself, is that culture really does impact everything you do. And most of the time, people don't see that and they attribute a cultural difference to a personality difference or worse, a character flaw. So someone will say, I don't trust that person because they did X, or they're not a good employee because they did Y. And they attribute it to that person's character or personality instead of culture. And so I love helping people see that no, this is a cultural thing. It's not about, right and wrong or good and bad. So those are the main two things that drive me in this work.
Well, Nicole, I want to say I admire that so much. And I feel that for me as well, why we are so connected in this passion is I've lived in two different countries. And interestingly enough, my husband has also traveled while he was with his dad in the military in different countries. And, when you connect with people that have an opportunity to see the world and see themselves and see others from that open prism, that there's more than just the way I live and just the way my neighbors live,
Right.
this is really empowering. And it also liberating because it gives you this understanding that there is more, right? That there is more acceptance, there needs to be more inclusion, and we need to be more open minded toward differences in other people. So I
Absolutely.
want to just welcome our listeners as we having them join in. Let's just have some say hello, Henry.
Hi,
So good
Henry.
to see you. Robert's joining
Rob.
in from New York. Hi, Rob. Good to see you. Guy Lambert saying hello from
Hi,
Chicago.
Guy.
Hello. We have Martin from Germany joining in. Molly,
Hi,
oh, so
Molly.
good to see
Yeah, hi,
you all.
everyone.
Thank you so much for joining in and supporting us. We're so excited. Now, as we dive into this, it's going to be full of nuggets. Nicole, I cannot wait to learn from you. And if you listening and viewing right now have any questions, drop them in the comment. We'll make sure we'll answer them for you. So, Nicole, now the work is changing. And also the skills that we need are changing, right? The cultural competency is so important, I believe, for anybody that want to grow their career, and so importantly for people who see themselves as leaders. And why is that? What is this importance is about?
Yeah, absolutely. So I totally agree with you, right? So there's a number I often quote, which is that there's 258 million people currently living and working outside of their home country. So, and that number goes up every year. So you are bound to be working with people from other cultures. Even I say, even if you never leave home, right? Even if these days you're working from home, you're probably on a global team or you're working with clients or suppliers in other countries. Right? So you just can't escape culture anymore, right? It's all around us. So well, I kind of want to start with maybe what is cultural competency, just to kind of clarify what that
Yes,
is.
this
And,
is
and I
perfect.
and I will say that the definition varies, and I hear people use it in different ways. So I'm not saying it's an easy answer, but for me, cultural competency is all about being able to successfully communicate with people from different cultures and backgrounds. And typically that means international. So sometimes it'll cross over to domestic, people meaning other cultures such as Muslim Americans, for example, or African American culture. But generally speaking, cultural competency is about global competencies, so working with people from other countries. So yeah, so you mentioned this, the idea of skills changing. So what I see happening is companies more and more are recognizing that this is a skill that they need. So there was a study done by the American Management Association that showed that only 18% of companies felt that they had a strong global leadership pipeline, meaning they only had 18% of people they felt that were culturally competent, is essentially what they're saying, right? And most people don't get training on this. So if you're an expat that's relocating, usually you're getting some kind of, I shouldn't even say usually, because it's about 40% of people get cultural training or get offered cultural training. But if you are not an expat and you are a business traveler, or in sales or on a global team, most likely you're not getting any training, or you haven't been. But what's happening is companies are recognizing the world is getting more global, and they're starting to offer this type of cultural competency training for people. And even large companies, of course, are kind of ahead of this, but I see it with smaller and mid-sized companies. So Alibaba has a global leadership academy, Heineken has something called they call their international graduate program, and both programs are really taking in younger employees, perhaps college graduates, and training them to have this global mindset, to train them to be prepared to work in other countries and cultures because they recognize the importance of that. So, so that's definitely changing, I think, in a positive way where companies realize we need to equip our people.
I absolutely agree with you, Nicole. And what I would love to touch, and for you, our listeners, to think about the numbers, right? So the companies are saying 18% pipeline. So there's definitely a shortage of people that are globally and culturally competent, that have a skill set and they have capacity and they have awareness in order to communicate successfully and build relationships successfully, whether it's business or professional relationship in the different arenas in different countries. And then not many companies embracing or offering that type of competencies.
Right.
So I would like to encourage you as a listener and as aspiring leader, growing and developing yourself, perhaps look into educating yourself on those skill set and growing those skill set yourself. So take, so to speak, ownership in your own hands to prepare yourself and be qualified and equipped. So when the opportunity comes, you know what the cultural competence is about. And Nicole, I also would like for you to give us a brief, maybe description or explanation why and how cultural competence is different from emotional intelligence and even, diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, sure. And so I obviously I completely agree with what you said. You have to take control of that, and I can talk about that in a minute of some things that people can do. Um, but yeah, so there's a lot of words around in intercultural, which can get confusing for people, which I understand. But there's cross-cultural, intercultural, cultural intelligence, cultural competency. And so, what I would say first is that it's similar to diversity and inclusion, and there's so much overlap. But usually, diversity and inclusion is focused on domestic work. So, cultural differences within your own country is typically diversity and inclusion. And again, intercultural is going to be global. So working with people that may or may not be living in your home country, but are generally from other countries. And then emotional intelligence is so needed, right? But what I think and I believe cultural intelligence does, or cultural competency is, it's different in that it adds this layer of culture. So in emotional intelligence, you have to understand, how people work, how they think, what motivates them. Similar things in cultural competence, but you have to also first understand what their values are in that culture and how that influences their behaviors and how they work. So, another part of cultural competency that is important, and that can get left out, unfortunately, is it's more than just cultural sensitivity or awareness. It's super important, but it needs to go beyond that. So sometimes people say, well, I understand how I understand that I communicate differently than my team in Brazil. Okay, that's great, but that's just one step. Why do they behave differently than you? What do you understand yourself? Do you understand your values and how that influences your behavior? And then equip people by giving them strategies for managing those differences. So it's not enough to just say, people from China are like this, people from the US are like that, and they're different, and you need to respect that. It's, well, what do you do if you're working on a global team or you're managing someone from another culture? How do you need to change your behaviors? How do you need to manage that person? As a leader, if you're leading a team of, let's say, 10 people from 10 different countries, the same way you motivate one person is not going to work on somebody else, right? If you're in charge of hiring and retaining talent, that's going to be different if you're working with people from different cultures. So I think that's just also another important piece, is that you need to give people skills, right? Not just tell them about the differences, but how do you give negative feedback? Because for example, or how do you manage a team or a project? Because people think that there is a right and wrong way of doing that. This is the best way to communicate. For example, in the US, you want to be direct because that's efficient and that's the best way. And if somebody is indirect, it's seen as a negative trait, and that's not the case. It's just a different communication style, right? So teaching why those differences exist and then how you can bridge those differences is super important.
You have really gave a lot of description and a lot of tips and depth and very, I say, valuable explanation of the differences and what really needs to be focused on. And before we dive into the next topic, I would like to acknowledge our listeners. We have Robert saying, I studied abroad in Argentina. Hello, Nicole. I know you have good relationship, friendship with you.
Yes.
Agree.
Hey, Robert.
Robert, I agree too. The cross-cultural understanding is allowing us to make friends and also allowing us to advance in our career, right? We have
Yes.
Rajat saying greetings from Connecticut. Hi,
Hi.
Rajat. Martina saying hello from Peru. Here we have international
Oh,
people
nice.
joining in. Henry was saying he agreed to what we were discussing, saying these competencies are key today. I think HR are sensitive and more attended to it than procurement. And I feel those are important skill sets within the organization, no matter what department you're in. Like you
Yes.
mentioned, you may have, procurement, they may have relationship with different vendors from all over the globe, right? The HR, for in my role, I was managing employees from 50 different countries, moving people into different countries. So that is impacted. Salespeople, they go global. There's a lot of companies that are expanding globally. They go sell products to international customers. And then operations, let's say you operate in a different country, whether you produce widgets or whether you do a service or whether you move equipment or provide whatever you provide, you need to have the skill set to be able to communicate. And Nicole, to what you touched, cultural competency is all about how you communicate, right?
Yeah.
Your perception, your awareness of yourself, and your knowledge and understanding of other people's culture and what drives them, what
Exactly.
drives their communication, what values that they have. So when something is communicated, you're not having a misconception or misunderstanding or offense, right?
Right.
And then you're also aware enough and equipped enough to communicate in a way that is not going to offend them. And I think a lot of people, they know that there are differences from other cultures,
Yeah.
and sometimes they're more forgiving to that, but
Yeah.
still you may say something or show something. And we've had a joke like this in the office when we have a Spanish speaker coming to another Spanish speaking country in South America and saying something that is normal in one language but in
Right.
other language is completely offensive, right? So
Yes.
it's like those nuances even in the same language can be devastating in a way.
Yeah.
So
Ab- that's a great point. It made me think of something that is, so in intercultural training, at least when you're working with expats, but also business people, when the cultures seem very similar. So it's an American, a US American doing business with a Canadian, or someone from Argentina doing business with someone from Colombia. People assume similarity and then they don't prepare themselves at all, or they don't get in that mindset, right? So if you're going to go do business in Japan and you're from the US, you probably are going to think, oh wow, that's going to be very different, I need to prepare myself. And you don't do that with cultures of similarity. And another key important point, I think, is that it's also about adaptability as a leader, because just because a country, like a country or that culture, doesn't mean you're actually good at adapting to that culture, right? So you're right, it's about perception and communication, but it's also about being able to adapt and, like you said, change your communication style, change the way you've been doing things for a long time, right? So that, I think, is the most challenging part. It's behavioral change, and that's difficult for everyone.
I yes, yes,
Yeah.
Nicole. I absolutely agree. The change and because the show is called Powering in EQ, the thought behind this is the change. Most of the times, normally, people see the change need to come from outside. So it's like we have to find more understanding. People need to be more, open to communicate, and people need to understand me better. So we seek that change or we seek that acceptance from outside. But powering in EQ is based on you have to generate that empowerment and awareness and change from within, and you have the control. So although we don't control people around us and what they see and say and perceive, you and I very well in the position, and it's within our power to to make this change from within us, right? To start with us, start with me. What do I do today to become more culturally competent? How can I develop myself to become more culturally competent leader? And what awareness do I need to gain of myself and maybe my own prejudgment sets that each one of us have, and then educate myself of what the differences others have, their different values, and be more aware and be more acceptive. So with that, Nicole, I think we may want to say how we have more people joining. And actually, I'm really
Okay.
excited that a lot of people resonate with our conversation. I want to say hello to Virginia.
Oh, hi,
Virginia, so
Virginia.
good to see you. Andrew is saying hi. We appreciate your
Hey, Andrew.
compliments, Andrew. We'll do our best to shine and, brighten up your day. Henry is saying procurement often reflect in terms of cost versus benefits, mostly under the disguise of saving money. How would you convince? So maybe we can chat a little bit on this point. Nicole, what do you think?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for the question. So, Henry, so I think, you're asking, if I understand, just repeating it, how do you convince procurement or companies in general that they need to invest money into this, right? So that's always the challenge. What I would say has gotten easier, so as someone who does this on a pretty much daily basis, what has gotten easier is that, when you talk about cultural competency, you can talk about it in terms of expats relocating or people doing business internationally. I mean, not that they're totally separate, but right now, people aren't going on international assignments. So, more and more people are working on global virtual teams. So, I did a study recently, and the people that completed the study, it showed that there was a 66% increase in people working on global teams. So while that, in itself isn't like explaining dollars yet, you can start with that, right? So there has been an explosion of people working on virtual global teams. And so, Jenna, how you said before, it could be your IT team or your accounting team. It's not just your salespeople or those in global mobility or that have a typical international role. Also, what I think has made it easier for procurement is that intercultural, or tends to be housed under global mobility, and so it's always seen as for expats. Now that's shifting to move under learning and development. And so in my experience, companies and learning and development teams will look at that dollar amount on a per head or per person basis, and so you can get that number down pretty low where it's actually not costly. So intercultural training for expats, and developing cultural competency in expats is often seen as very expensive because it's done one on one. Cultural competency training within organizations can be done in a group format, and the cost is very, very low, lower than most other trainings that companies are outsourcing. Another way is to have companies, and I've worked with a couple of companies that, they start outsourcing cultural training, but then I actually work with them to help them build something in-house. And so this is another way of doing it. But yeah, that, I mean, that definitely is the challenge. I think also the stigma of cultural competency being a soft skill is it can be a challenge for someone who believes in this. And what I do with that is really show that this is actually teaching business skills. You know, you most of the time when people have a problem or an issue and they need to fix it, you know, around the world, it's we're not getting things done on time, therefore we're losing money. So there's not alignment on a global team that costs them delays in production of something, that costs delays in a project getting completed, and that costs them money. So you can usually show it that way. It's mainly, I would say, the miscommunication culturally tends to lead to delays that cost people money.
Yes, I agree with you on that. And I agree with a lot of things you're saying, Nicole.
Likewise.
Well, you touched on something very important that previously most of the focus who needs the intercultural training were the people that would go and work on assignment in different countries, and not all the companies even offer that type of training. So a small amount they do indeed offer that. They see the value that is important cultural element, communication, and the foundation for success to be able to successfully communicate and understand the people and the culture you're working with in another country. The important point that you touched on is that with the shift right now that we are in, we more and more on the closer scale globally. And it may not be necessarily going physically to places, but virtually.
Right.
And virtual communication presents additional number of challenges, right?
Right.
So in addition to that, the business acumen, the business skill set, although it may be intangible, the cultural competencies may seem, like you said, soft skill or maybe somewhat intangible. It's hard to say, you know, what return on investment you are going to get. Yet it is so important because ultimately it leads to successful communication and clarity in communication and achieving the goals and the results that you want to achieve through that communication. And if there is a miscommunication, a misunderstanding, like you mentioned, there most likely be some delays, some,
Right.
you know, maybe offenses or some business costs to that. And I can say and attribute to my experience, we had a challenging, you know, in my previous job, we had a challenging project in Colombia, and not everybody had an understanding of the pace that people do business with,
Right.
of the communication style that people do business, and then also the requirement of documentation and processes. So there was an understanding of the business. We'll go, we'll get it done, we'll conquer. You know, let's go, 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 go. And when you come to this, it's a slow down. Let's look at the process. Let's communicate. Let's figure out the details. And that was just a clash. So, in addition to that, cultural differences, there is language differences, and there's also accompanied cultures, right? And it's a
Yes,
little bit more,
absolutely.
I say we go more in depth or in detail, but they're also that present. So I do agree with you, Nicole, that it is so important. And it is, I feel it needs to be at the core of each business that want to be successful on a global scale, and also at the core understanding and belief for each leader that wants to grow
Right.
and lead themselves and their companies forward.
Yeah, and that made me think of another point, you know, especially if you're a leader that's involved in mergers and acquisitions, culture is often, well, culture in the way I talk about it, so intercultural, cultural competency is often left out of those conversations because understandably the focus is on, you know, does this financially make sense and are they a good corporate culture fit? But then they wonder why there's all these delays and problems and misunderstandings later on. It's because no one looked at the intercultural or cross-cultural part of that. So it just made me think of that.
I agree. Yes, it's right. And we have more comments here. I just want to go through them. Molly saying Canada, US as well, and maybe US and UK, right? There's a lot of differences there when we touched on that. Virginia saying most expats and the environment they're moving into think the burden adapt so they can do it quickly. And I disagree. I disagree, Virginia, because it took me moving to the United States 14 years ago. It took me time to adapt and much more to business acumen. It's, you know, it's the interpersonal relationship and communication is one thing, but the business acumen is a completely different game, and being aware of those things are important. So Henry saying he has some typos. No worries, Henry. Elaine says she
Yes.
agrees. And then Henry says virtual
Yeah.
assignments are providing to cause a few more headaches than previously thought.
That's true.
Yes, that's so
And yeah,
true.
that's a good point, right? It ties into virtual assignments. And I think, I'm not sure exactly what Virginia, if I understood everything Virginia said in her comment, but, she mentioned that expats anyway feel like the burden is on them to, there we go, to them to adapt like that completely. And I'm, again, sorry, Virginia, if I'm getting it wrong, but, she could also mean that that's shouldn't be the case, right? And so that's another reason why cultural competency is so important is maybe you're not the one going somewhere. Yes, yeah, that's all right. Thank you, Virginia. Yeah, I think I
Exactly.
get that. So you could work at a 50-person company, in Cleveland, Ohio, but maybe an expat from Nicaragua comes to Cleveland and is now working on your team. That person also needs to adapt, and that's something in intercultural training that I hate to say it, but it's true. Most companies, yeah, most companies don't want to invest in that. So back to kind of Henry's comment, it's, well, you have expats coming into your country. You need to understand them as well. Companies are less likely to put money towards that, to be blunt, than they are helping the expat. But Virginia is absolutely right. That's why cultural competency is needed. You don't have to be that expat. You don't have to be even that business traveler. You could be working virtually, which is what's happening right now with people all over the world. So
And to this point, Nicole, again, if your company that you're working for is amazing, yet they do not see the need or the benefit or the value of cultural competency, do not leave your development into the hands of your executives and your managers. Take that into your own uh, your own will and your own choice, and say, although my company may not be offering or seeing the value, you be the change you want to see around yourself, and start educating yourself, start learning about it. And we come to this point, Nicole, we've talked about what it is, why it is needed. Now, how can people achieve, like, let's say I want to improve my cultural competency, and great if my company offers it, but what if my company doesn't offer any of that type of support?
right.
And what tools, where can I go and educate myself? What advice would you give to me?
Yeah, sure. So there's lots of different ways. I think these days there's just going online. So, YouTube and LinkedIn, following people that, I do this myself. I've been in intercultural training for a long time, but I'm not an expert in every country. So if I want to know more about Nigeria, I'm going to follow someone that can help me with that, right? So I think these days LinkedIn is great for that. Facebook is great, or Facebook, YouTube, but joining groups. So, especially for, I would say, people that do not live in a diverse area or aren't exposed to that. And I know everything's virtual now, so it's a little tricky, but before pre-COVID, I was involved in several meetup groups. So I don't know if people know meetup.com, but and it could be a language exchange group or just an expat group, or they're just a group to meet people from other cultures and backgrounds, right? Because that if you're not getting that at work, let's say, or at home, you're not around a diverse population, where are you going to get that, right? And so there are also virtual meetups and Facebook groups and things like that. So that's just starting small. Another interesting way to do that is internations. So I don't know if everyone's familiar with that. It's internations.org. Not every city has a chapter, but they are basically a hub of expats all over the world. And so and there's different, depending on the city. So New York has tons of groups, but there can be all kinds of, how do you say, like social groups to meet people that typically are expats. They're living, in your country, but they're from somewhere else. And that's a great way to meet and interact and practice. Practice your communication with people from other countries. If you're interested in languages, like you mentioned that earlier, take a language course virtually. You do learn so much about a culture through language. And then if your company's not offering a cultural training, because let's say they don't want to pay for it, what I see companies do is, if they are global, so if they have offices in other countries, or even good partners or suppliers in other countries, what they'll do is have set up some sort of informal, I guess, program where you have cultural ambassadors. So, I do know this one company, and they don't want to invest in cultural training, which is fine. But what they do is they have cultural ambassadors in all their different offices that will do lunch and learns, and maybe a webinar here and there on their culture, how to improve and build relationships with your colleagues in the Netherlands or your colleagues in France, etc. And then, I mean, there are courses you can take. So I mentioned, LinkedIn Learning has some courses you can take. A plug for me, but I offer courses but there are so many people that offer cultural competency and certifications. I think it's extremely important, if you're going to be a leader or are a leader that's managing a global team, or if you are in HR, like global HR or recruiting, and you are looking at international talent, you have to understand. I mean, I have stories on, how cultural differences impacted, hiring of people, right? We worked with a client, an American company who opened a office in Thailand, and they were trying to hire a local Thai person for a managerial position, and they had trouble because they said no one was qualified. And really what it came down to was how people were communicating and how they were interviewing. In the US, we tend to be very individualistic, yeah, that too, and just numbers, and, well, I'm the best person for the job because I increased sales by 22% last year, and I have this qualification and this, and just essentially bragging or boasting about yourself. And that, generally speaking, is not the Thai way. And they were saying things like, I'm well liked by my team, or have a good reputation. And the managers wanted very tangible, specific items. And they didn't realize that they needed to even change the way they conducted the interview, or how they perceived the interviewees. So, yeah. So I mean, those are just some of the things you can do. It's a lot of reading and educating. Hopefully, you can convince your organization to do something. What I think is a nice baby step, if you're going to try to ask your organization to do this, is you should, if you have a learning and development team or person or somebody in charge of internal learning, ask them. Say, hey, we're working all over the world. Can we add a global component to that? And oftentimes that's easy because they have systems in place for delivering this type of learning. You're just asking to add like this, and to me, it's like this much, but it's so important.
Nicole, you've touched on many important points. And what I hear from what you've described is that it is not an overnight accomplishment.
Yeah.
It's not an overnight, I'll go, I went, I read everything, I know everything, I'm ready to move forward. it is a journey. Like with
Yes.
any skill, if you want to sharpen it, if you want to get great at it, if you want to gain more awareness, if you want to grow to be more globally and culturally competent, you need to embrace that it is a journey. And you need to realize how many nations and how many cultures are around the world. It's impossible to learn all of them at once. Yet if you start with one or two, and the ones that maybe resonate or you are involved with the most, and then upgrade and move forward and broaden your perspective, in addition to giving opportunities for you and improving your communication skill, improving your perception to the point that you've shared with the HR interview, it will also create opportunities for you. And what I love about your advice, Nicole, is that you said it is more tangible relationships that give you the most, I say, valuable tips and the most valuable awareness, because I can go and read articles about, what other
Right.
culture is about.
Yes.
And I can go, watch YouTube videos. But when I'm communicating with a live person, and right now the best thing to do is virtual, you can communicate with anybody around the world, right? I have this insight and I have this thing that you can ask questions, you can have more in-depth
Yes.
conversation. Now, when you're educating yourself in this way, you're also educating the other person about your culture, right? So it's a win-win
Exchange. Yeah.
situation. It's an exchange. So maybe do dedicate some time to exploring other cultures and meeting people that are absolutely from different region or different language, different background than you are. That will definitely enhance your skill set and will give a boost to your career
Right.
opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why I think Internations is great because it's a lot of business professionals. And, they're one that I belong to. They have monthly, just kind of meet and greet chats for anyone who wants to join. And then from there, like you said, it's up to you to can drive your career, right? So you seek out people and have these conversations with them, right? To learn. And you're right about it not, it being a journey, because the fact is you can't take a 1 hour course and then all of a sudden you're culturally competent, right? You'll get a lot of the basic understanding, but it's practice, just like
Yes.
if learning a language, right? It's you have to constantly work at it. One thing that I do when I work with companies is, which I think is a benefit of going virtual. There's a lot of complaints about virtual training, and I get those complaints and understand them, but you don't have to give a 8 hour or 6 hour in-person training. Now we get to break it up into smaller bites, and that works perfectly for intercultural understanding and cultural competency training. You can break it up into hour, 90-minute, or even smaller bites with your team. And what I see happening too is teams are inviting their employees that come from other cultures to participate. So I might be leading a cultural competency training, but there's a lot of active participation from the employees that saying, I'm from Argentina and now I'm living in France, and let me share my experiences about what I think the differences are, or here's me telling you how to build relationships with me. So getting kind of buy-in but input from your own people and your own teams. That's really helpful.
This is valuable. Yes, you don't have to look far. Like you said, most of us that work within the global organizations, if you do work within a global organization, you most likely have people from other countries that you communicate with. So take some time to put aside from just business discussion or just what's going on in your immediate team environment and just have a conversation like a coffee chat. Take a
Right.
mug and just sit each other and look
Yeah.
at each other's eyes in the Zoom and just have a little bit of more life conversation, more of a, what really makes a difference for you, and maybe share what makes a difference for, they share what makes difference for them. You can learn what you can do to add value to them.
Yes.
And this is very, very valuable tips and steps. And Like Virginia saying, find language partners. I
Mm-hmm.
have five and practice Chinese and language. I need to do that. Maybe I need to have you, Nicole, as my language partner
Oh,
for Spanish. I need
oh
to
yeah, I can
work on
try. You
that.
probably find somebody better, but
I
yeah,
have I have my ex-colleague from Argentina that I love that
oh,
I
great.
need to
Okay.
reconnect and say let's do like a bi-weekly
But then
Spanish
you're getting the
sessions.
Argentinian accents, which I love, by the way. But
Yes. So we have a lot of people joining in. A lot of people are saying good comments, sharing, saying yes, good points, cheering each other. This is wonderful. And Jeremy says here, can you train anyone to adapt to a host location? Or are there some people better suited to certain locations than others?
that's an interesting question, Jeremy. Thanks for it. So I would say that I don't know if I'd use the word better suited, but yes. So, for example, I do really well in Latin American cultures, and that's probably why I speak Spanish and Portuguese, because the cultural values that a lot of those countries hold, that like that I've spent time in Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, are similar to mine. So I do adapt well to those cultures because they are similar. So I feel like there's kind of two parts to your question. And this is not across the board. There are some people that are very similar to a culture and they go there and for whatever reason, as an expat, they don't adapt well. And that doesn't have to do with the culture necessarily. Maybe that's feelings of isolation or unhappiness with job, etc. I would say that and Jenna, you probably have way more insights on this, but it's kind of like, is cultural competency something that everyone can learn, and do some people have it innately, are some people better at it? So can you train anyone to adapt to a host location? I would say yes, with a little asterisk there. I think if they are willing and open, right? I have met those rare occasions, but I have met those people that have said, well, I don't care. I'm going, I'm moving to China, but I come from the US, from headquarters. They're going to have to adapt to me. This is the way we do things. Like, that still exists, which is shocking to me. So I would say those people, you're not going to be able to train them because they don't want to be trained and they're not open to it. But I do believe that, yes, short answer, yes, you can train people to adapt to any location. And also, I would say some people might be better suited based on, their personal preference.
Nicole, I almost
Uh
dropped
oh.
my big mic over
Oh
here.
no, what happened?
Because it is so true. You
Yeah,
can only lead a horse to the water.
right.
You cannot force somebody who does not see the value, who does not want to be more self-aware and be more acceptive and be more, and even realizing that you may not know everything.
Yes.
And your way of doing things in business and your acumen, no matter how great it may be absolutely strange on the other side of the world. So if you don't have that perception, number one, being humble, right? To realize you don't know everything, that there are other people that have as much value, as much knowledge on the other side of the world. They may live in a different environment, they may have a different financial circumstances, yet it doesn't mean that they're lower in value in some way. So that internal willingness, and that's why I almost dropped my mic, because it is so important. And I feel as this show is all about your empowerment and you becoming better leader, I say, how can you embrace this is for all of us to be a little more humble, for all of us to realize, and for you to realize as you're tuning in, that it's all about your willingness and it's all about your openness and acceptance. And if you open and you're willing and accepting, that attitude is transparently conveyed,
Right.
right? You
Yeah.
don't have to communicate. You don't have to say too much. You don't even have to know the language too much. But if your intention, if your heart comes from, I'm here, I know my worth, I know my business, yet I'm open to learn and I'm open to accept, and I'm open to embrace the differences and accept your value, people are going to appreciate it anywhere in the world. So that I feel that is so valuable. We have so many people joining in, and
Good.
so many people saying good things. Jeremy also said here, are corporates still prepared to pay nice, like for cultural training, language training, family support, counseling, and other? Maybe I can answer that, Nicole. I say, Jeremy, I think right now and where we are, a lot of companies are tightening their belts. They're trying to cut everything that they possibly can to survive. Unfortunately, that also involves people. And unfortunately, one of the areas that usually, from my observation, is being dismissed as a learning and development, including some of the softer skills, yet very valuable skills that we are talking about today. So I feel it will depend on what the company's values are, what the executive team sees as the most necessity. Because if the executive team says, well, we are great as we are, we don't really have to invest more into the soft skills, everybody's running fine, the business running fine, the people are okay, then no, they're not going to invest. But if they are coming from different backgrounds and they've seen the challenges of cultural, adaptation themselves, then they will have, I feel, more openness to that and potentially desire to invest and grow. As hopefully we emerge from this COVID financial and health crisis, more and more companies will accept and be open to improve that area. That is very important, and I do believe set the employees and the organizations for success globally. So we also have people joining in. Johanna saying hi, good to see you today joining in. Many good, interesting points. Yes, thank you, Nicole, so much for sharing your knowledge and wisdom. We just go, Nicoles, agree. Martin saying agree with you on what we've talked about. Sandra said, I have a good friend who came to the States with others from Bangladesh, and because the boss wasn't educated about the culture in Bangladesh, there were several employees who were greatly insulted by what they thought was an intentional slight that wasn't. They eventually learned companies and leaders need to have the training as much as expats, as
Right. And I think
to
that's
your
what
point.
Virginia's point, and
Yes.
absolutely, but that, yeah, but that was always the challenge. Companies didn't want to pay for that, but now that expats are really not going on assignments, I am seeing more and more companies realize, like, well, we have everyone working globally, so we need to invest in this kind of
Yeah, so
business.
we've had amazing conversation, great tips, Nicole. Thank you so much.
Thank
We went
you.
almost for an hour.
Yeah, I know. And
I
I
could talk,
yeah,
I believe
yeah.
I could talk for another hour with you. There's so,
Same.
so many good things that you've shared. Now, as we close in, we've talked about what is cultural competency, why is it important, how can you become more cultural competent leader, and what companies can do to embrace and understand the value of that development as well. And maybe with the closure, you give us some tips on the benefits. Maybe you can give some tips to convince our listeners to, take that ownership and start putting on the calendar some of those explorations and education and growing your competency in culture.
Yeah, so some of the benefits, right? Is that what you're? Yeah.
Yes.
So I mean, like, some of the things we already mentioned, right? That self-awareness and openness, all of that leads to empathy. More importantly, for a leadership perspective, well, using the word perspective, it gives you the ability to see things from multiple perspectives. So if you're a leader and you have to make tough decisions, you need to be able to look at things from different angles. And being culturally competent and recognizing that there are many ways to look at the same issue ties over into, just your own culture. So even if you're not working globally, right, you, by being culturally competent, you automatically have this ability to see things from different perspectives and different angles. I think you're also better at reading the room. So, like when you go into a meeting or negotiation and there's people from different cultures, you probably have a better sense of where people are just from that initial kind of feeling. I think also, we tend to trust our gut instinct a lot of times, which is very important. But when you're working with people from other cultures, that gut instinct might be wrong. And so in a business negotiation, you need to be able to kind of check that gut instinct and say, well, my brain is telling me do this, but could there be a cultural factor involved that my brain isn't registering? So I think that those are the biggest things, being able to analyze problems and solve them by looking at all angles. I mean, it's kind of the same reason why it's been shown that diverse teams are more innovative and productive, because you have different ways of thinking on your team. It's almost like if you're culturally competent, you have all those people in one brain, right? So I think that's the largest benefit. And like I said, with Alibaba, Heineken, just two examples. I mean, they're looking to hire people out of university that are culturally competent, and also they're willing to invest to train them because they recognize that importance. And sure, those are big companies, but that's just going to keep on growing.
Yes, Nicole, these are great benefits. And I would just add to say, if you want to stand out, if you want to make a difference in your own life and in life of those that you work with or you communicate with, I encourage you to embrace um, cultural competence is one of the skills you want to invest in, and you want to make this maybe a weekly commitment. And it doesn't have to be hours, like you said, Nicole, maybe 15 to 30 minutes. Maybe join some type of group, maybe creating your own group, use your colleagues from other countries, invest in broadening your perspective and learning how to communicate what other people from other cultures value, and how to be able to, Nicole, very valuable tip, read the room, read people, read the atmosphere, understand what those nonverbal or verbal clues are, what they truly mean. It is going to set you up for success. It is going to really make you stand out. And again, this is something each one of us, I believe, need to invest on an ongoing basis. And if you do want to sharpen it and get certified in cultural competence, and Nicole is your girl,
Thank
make
you.
sure you connect with her on LinkedIn. She has amazing certification that she provide, a very in-depth training that she has. And also, if you or your company is interested in expanding more and giving the benefit of cultural awareness and competencies to your team, make sure you connect with Nicole. She'll be happy to help you with that, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks so much, Jen. I appreciate that.
All right. Well, it's been absolute pleasure, Nicole, to speak with you today. So many good wisdom. We had so many notes, so many comments, people joining in. It's been valuable conversation. I appreciate you sharing your expertise with us and getting this week a good start.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. And thanks everyone for tuning in and for your comments. I really appreciate it.